Last time we talked about colonization in New France with the Huronian Indians, French Jesuits, French fur traders. Today I want to talk about English colonization. The English established their first colonies in the early 17th century, about a century after the Spanish established New Spain in the New World. The first English colony was established in 1587, I believe, by Sir Walter Raleigh. It was on the Outer Banks in today's North Carolina. It was established not only to start an English colony in the New World, but also to give Sir Walter Raleigh a base from which to attack Spanish galleons on the way back to Spain loaded with gold and other treasures from the New World. This initial colony at Roanoke did not survive. And this is one of those great mysteries of Western history. You see specials on television about it, the lost colony of Roanoke. I don't know that we've ever found out for sure what happened. I'm sure many of the colonists may have simply died. If you've ever been to the Outer Banks in the summertime, it can be pretty brutal with the heat and humidity and the mosquitoes and the snakes and on and on and on. Of course, some of the natives or some of the colonists may have been incorporated into nearby Indian tribes. So this has remained something of a mystery over the centuries. Sir Walter Raleigh's initial plan was to return the following year in 1588 to bring supplies and more colonists to Roanoke. This, of course, was delayed due to the Spanish Armada in the attempt by the Spanish to invade England and turn England back into a Catholic nation. So when Raleigh did return the following year, there was nothing left of the English colony. Now, in 1607, another English attempt would be made, this time on the Chesapeake, a little further north at Jamestown. This colony will survive after some early periods of crisis that would look like the colony may not. This early colony at Jamestown was utterly dependent upon the Indians for survival, for food. The Indians viewed the English as potential trading partners, perhaps potential allies in their diplomatic and military conflicts with other Indian tribes. So for those who have often wondered why the Indians didn't band together to drive the Europeans out when they were able, the Indians didn't view this in their interest. They thought the Europeans might be of some use to them. I want to, while we're talking about the English here, I want to talk about the, how should we phrase it? Maybe the Christian mission in North America. Or you might even think of this as sort of close encounters of a colonial kind. These two distinctly different peoples, Christian Europeans confronting the Indians for the first time. We saw this in New France with the Jesuits and the Huronians. Let's take a look at it here on the eastern seaboard of North America. I want to stress that Christianity was a weapon of conquest for the English and for many Europeans. It was not, for the Indians, a path to salvation. It was a religion which allowed the Europeans a great deal of self-confidence in imposing their rule over the Indians. There was indeed, in one of the first English colonies after Jamestown, of course, is the Plymouth colony, founded in, 1619, 1620, up in what we think of today as Massachusetts. The Great Seal of the colony had a figure of an Indian pleading with the European Christians to, quote, come over and help us. This Christian faith gave the colonists an inordinate amount of confidence and helped work as a tool of conquest. Now, the missionaries among the Puritans constantly sought to convert the Indians. The Indians, being polite, would sit and listen to this proselytizing, usually in silence. This silence led many of the Puritans to believe that the Indians had consented to conversion, when in fact conversions had not occurred. The Indians will in time begin to accept conversion, or at least pretend to accept conversion in exchange for European trade items. We saw this with Huronians and the French. European missionaries, Christian missionaries, completely overturned the spiritual world of the Indians. We talked about the shamans and how the presence of this new powerful Christian God reduced their stature in Indian society. It tended to turn Indian society upside down. Well, the same takes place here on the eastern seaboard of the United States. The Christian missionaries attempted to separate the Indians from their traditional relationship with the animals and to redirect Indian religious thought to the Christian God. The Puritans sought to change Indian life in such a way, their cultural and religious life in such a way, that it nearly amounts to cultural suicide for the Indians, to abandon the traditions that had been built up over the centuries in a quick exchange for this new powerful Christian God. It's difficult for us to comprehend the impact that this would have mentally, psychologically on the Indian people. One missionary complained that, quote unquote, sins which were left in Europe to divine justice are here in the New World punished by irons and stocks. Again, the Indians are the historical other, different from the Puritans, and we know that those people who are different from the majority can be persecuted, their labor taken, their property, indeed their lives can be taken. Just to demonstrate the seriousness with which the Puritans approached Christianity and the Christian mission, there was an early Bible translated into the native Indian language in Massachusetts. This, of course, is an arduous endeavor, and it shows the seriousness of these Puritans. The Puritans also attacked the polygamous relationships that the Indians had traditionally carried on, whereby the husband, father would have multiple wives and multiple families. Attacking polygamy as sin quite often led to the abandonment of particular wives and children by Indian fathers and husbands, as they were convinced by the Puritans to adopt monogamy. This, of course, had a disastrous relationship on Indian social life, as mothers and children were left uncared for. There's also a bit of bewilderment among the Puritans, especially, as to how to account for these people who appear to be outside the Christian cosmology. They're not mentioned in the Bible. Of course, Genesis has only 3 continents: Africa, Asia, and Europe. This new world is nowhere mentioned in the Bible, and these Indians are not mentioned. So how do we account for them? Some believe that the new world was indeed a sort of New Jerusalem for the Puritans to convert into the city of God. Others believe that perhaps the Indians were among the lost tribes of Israelites from antiquity. At any rate, there was an attempt to try to incorporate the Indians into the Christian cosmology. Europeans also, beginning with Columbus, described their arrival in the New World as being almost divine creatures. Columbus talks about this, and other explorers talk about it, that the Indians believed that the arrival of the Europeans were fulfilling mythologies that had long been present in Indian societies. These ideas have come under some scholarly attack recently. It could be that the Europeans are simply fulfilling their own sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that they are arriving in the New World as Christians to convert the Indians, and by attributing to the Indians the idea that Europeans are fulfilling Indian myths makes this a very powerful argument. I want to end this introductory lecture on the English colonies and their encounter with the Indians like this. Both the English and the Indians attempted to incorporate the other into their own cosmologies to make use of each other. Early English dependence upon the Indians for food allowed the Indians an upper hand. This upper hand was rapidly dissipated, however, because of Indians, their dependence upon European trade goods. We discussed this with the Columbian Exchange, those things made of metal, different fabrics that the Indians had not had access to before because they didn't have the large domesticated animals. I'm going to say another word here about gender in this colonial encounter between the English and the Indians. In the eyes of the English, the Indians had things backward. They allowed their women to work in agriculture while the men hunted and fished. This, in the eyes of the English, was all wrong, and it violated gendered norms. The English believed that the woman's place is in the home, the man's place is in the fields, producing crops, and this creates conflict between the two sides. In fact, from the earliest encounters all the way through Jefferson and Jackson in the 19th century, you'll see constant pressure put on the Indians by the whites to conform to European or Western gendered roles, which the English here in the early centuries view the Indians as transgressing by having women work outside the home. And of course, for most Europeans, hunting and fishing, especially hunting, was confined to the aristocracy, to the wealthy who could hunt on large manors or large estates in Europe. Hunting was something exclusive to the well-off, not to the average European peasant. A final word again on religion. Remember that the Indians are polytheistic, yet their attempts to incorporate this new Christian God into their already existing pantheon of gods is a difficult proposition because it's viewed as blasphemous by the European Christians for the obvious reason. So I think our next lecture will look at these two early English colonies, the first in the Chesapeake at Jamestown, and then the second at Plymouth in Massachusetts. Thank you.